I think right now adherence and retention is a little bit of a challenge in terms of the barriers we talked about. It's very hard for patients to travel and adhere to a really rigorous schedule. When you move into a decentralized model where patients are participating remotely in a lot of cases, maybe there's an element of home healthcare nursing where there's nurses going physically to a participant's home to take a blood draw or support drug delivery or drug administration, et cetera. That helps a lot. I do think when you move to more of a remote setting, there are less eyes, I guess, in a way, on the patient. There's a little less direct investigator um, connection, observation, etc. So that does introduce a little bit of a question mark. I think there's some interesting tools now around drug accountability, which is kind of a big one, but also around the ability to have quick telehealth check-ins with an investigator or study coordinator for a trial to be able to, make sure that a patient's feeling connected and getting the communication they want, but also so that the clinical sites who technically are responsible for that patient's participation, so that they have some, a little bit of insight and a little bit sort of closer touch points. So I think it's an interesting question because we want to reduce the burden and make it easier for patients. But in doing so, we also, there also needs to be a little bit of trust built in, I guess, as well. And so we need to make sure that we're supporting patients, making sure that we're keeping an eye on what's happening, so that everyone feels comfortable with the data. So long way of saying, I think that as we move to decentralized, we've got to appropriately kind of balance that out, and make sure the right kind of safeguards are in place.
I actually don't like the term adherence sometimes too much because, really, as we move towards more of these virtual models, what we really have to think about is taking the lessons from other fields, for example, user experience, in thinking about, are we meeting the needs of our participants in these trials? How do we better facilitate their needs and their access in order to actually drive the success of a trial? Part of this is, making sure that the patients are not just engaged in it, but they're partnered from the beginning. And the trial itself and all of the infrastructure behind it is really designed with that with patients in not just in mind, but as partners in the entire process. So a good example of this is even considering, when you're building out a registry, for example, the platform that you have for it and how people can access it. Are you able to share results? Is there a benefit for the patient, or sorry, the participant themselves in being a part of the registry or being a part of the trial? Can they understand and really be able to see the value, not just for themselves, but also within their disease, and ultimately what's going to happen in the care that they're going to see in their disease long term. So that's part of it, is really not just approaching it from the angle of this is a trial and how do we better get people to do the task for this trial to succeed, but really how do we ensure that the success of the trial is really interconnected with the goals of the patient community and that they are driving the success itself.
A lot of the challenges with long-term follow-up existed before a lot of this remote, and I think there's a lot of hope. What I hear in discussions is that this shift to having a little bit more remote monitoring or remote visits, physicians are embracing it, patients are embracing it. I'm hoping that maybe we get a little bit more accurate assessment in some areas. We're assessing the patient or in their own home. They haven't been on a plane or a long car ride or a train to get to the site. They're not in an unfamiliar place. So I hope maybe we can get some more real life experience, especially in the long-term view. That's my hope. There also is the challenge that some assessments are very difficult to do that way. So you have to find a different way to assess certain aspects. And I think that's going to take some innovation, some ingenuity, some creativity to figure out how to do that. It's one thing to send a nurse to draw blood, That's the easy solutions. The more difficult are sometimes these advanced neurological exams or assessing, a variety of mobility and things like that, and things where the doctors feel like they have to, really examine the patient in person in order to assess. So I think we're going to have to come up with ways to better do that. But I'm actually hopeful that we can get a better assessment of how people are doing long term.
We need to continue to evolve what we consider to be, regulatory grade data collection. Right now, what FDA thinks about is how we feel, function, and survive. And that's really part of what Tom was talking about, the data collection from the clinician. And I think in one of our slides, we talked about real world evidence, and this transition and the ability to use digital health tools and real world data collection will help us move beyond this feel, function, and survive to feel, function, and thrive. Because what we really want to understand is how patient communities are doing in their real world environment, as Tom said, not just in your clinical environment. And many of the measures that are currently collected in clinical trials can't even be done in all clinical spaces. They can only be done in particular clinical spaces. And so I think what we're doing is we're seeing this really important shift to being able to expand clinical trial participation and inclusion to those who can't get to certified clinical trial sites, but could get to their home physician site, by looking at how we modify what we're collecting, and even look at supplemental, secondary, and tertiary endpoints and outcomes that tell the whole story and talk about what's really happening in somebody's life, and whether or not somebody's thriving on a treatment or on a protocol. And we're having these conversations more, and hopefully we'll also start to see more equity in the participation within our trials, because we are opening up participation beyond the certified centers of excellence and sites. On the back end, that may also mean that access is broader once we have broader inclusion and trial participation.